Timmy was a 13-year-old boy who viewed the world with an unusual depth beyond his years. His passion lay in drawing characters he created in his mind, often heroes with thrilling backstories, likely inspired by the bravery of his mother, Mary Miller. To Timmy, Mary wasn't just his mother. She was his hero. A renowned investigative journalist, she had built a reputation for exposing the darkest secrets, unraveling multi-million-dollar schemes, and taking on corrupt politicians. Many had feared her work, and she had faced threats that would have made most people retreat. Timmy admired her deeply, though beneath his admiration lay a quiet, unspoken fear. In contrast, his father, David, was the calm in their family's storm. Unlike Mary's intensity, David provided stability, ensuring Timmy had a protected childhood. That evening, the house exuded peace. Timmy sat in his room, engrossed in an adventure book, unaware that Mary had called him earlier. Meanwhile, in the living room, Mary was buried in her work. The case she was investigating wasn't just complicated, it was dangerous. She was poring over files that could expose a corrupt police officer, someone with much to lose, and as Mary knew, much to hide. Sensing the tension in the air, David sought to lighten the mood. "Honey, I think I'll grab some chocolate from the store. It's been a while since we treated ourselves to dessert after dinner, don't you think?" he said playfully. Without looking up from her laptop, Mary murmured a distracted, "If you want to go ahead. Just don't take too long." David chuckled and walked down the hall to inform Timmy. "Son, I'll be right back, okay? If you need anything, just call me." Timmy, without lifting his eyes from the book, simply replied, "Okay, Dad." With that, David left, completely unaware that this simple act would change his life forever. As Mary typed furiously, the house was silent except for the rhythmic clicking of her keyboard and the occasional rustling of the wind outside. Upstairs, Timmy, feeling his eyelids grow heavy, let his book drop onto his chest and drifted into a peaceful sleep. But Mary's adrenaline surged. Something in the files before her felt too dangerous to ignore. Then, the calm night shattered like glass. A sudden metallic sound echoed through the living room. Mary shot up, heart pounding. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice firm but laced with alertness. Silence answered her. Taking cautious steps, she scanned the room for any movement. But before she could process what was happening, everything changed. David returned moments later, a bag of chocolates still dangling in his hand. As he approached the house, an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. The front door was slightly ajar. His heartbeat quickened. "Mary," called out, his voice trembling. Stepping inside, he froze. Mary lay motionless on the floor. David dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking. "Mary, talk to me. What happened?" His voice wavered between disbelief and despair. He had no idea what to do, where to touch, how to help. Before he could process the nightmare unfolding before him, sirens wailed in the distance. Flashing lights soon filled the house as police officers entered, assessing the scene with grim faces. A stern-faced officer turned to David. "Sir, we need you to come with us," he said with formality. David's eyes widened in confusion. "Me? But I want to buy chocolate. I wasn't here. I didn't do anything." His protests were swallowed by the heavy tension in the air. Meanwhile, Timmy, groggy from sleep, heard the muffled voices of strangers and noticed the flashing lights outside his window. Cautiously, he crept downstairs. Peering into the living room, he froze. Something was terribly wrong. His home, his sanctuary, felt unfamiliar, hollow. He didn't yet understand what was happening, but he felt it in his bones. His world was crumbling. As he stood at the top of the stairs, trying to make sense of the chaos below, one of the officers noticed him and exchanged a concerned glance with a colleague before approaching. "You must be Timmy," the man said, kneeling to meet the boy's eye level. "It's okay. We just need to sort a few things out. You'll be able to rest soon." But Timmy didn't feel okay. He scanned the room, searching for his mother, his father, any familiar face, but found only strangers. His stomach twisted. "Where are my parents?" he asked, his voice trembling. The officer hesitated. "Your father has been arrested, accused of taking your mother's life. But don't worry, he'll be safe." He paused, scratching the back of his neck, unable to continue. Timmy's breath caught in his throat. The silence that followed was louder than any words could have been. Before he could react, his neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, gently pulled him away. "Come, dear, have a seat," she coaxed. But Timmy didn't want to sit. He wanted answers. He wanted his mom. "I want to see my mom," he insisted, struggling to stand. Mrs. Anderson's voice wavered as she held him firm. "Timmy, now is not the time. Please, trust me." But Timmy knew. The look in her tear-filled eyes told him everything. Something was deeply, irrevocably wrong. Panic surged within him. "I want to know what happened," he shouted, his face reddening. One of the officers approached, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Kid, I'm so sorry. Your mom, she's gone. But we're investigating what happened. We'll find answers, I promise." Timmy stood frozen. The words hit like a sledgehammer to his chest. Gone? No. It wasn't true. It couldn't be. Tears blurred his vision, but beneath his grief, a wave of denial washed over him. "You're wrong," he choked out. "My mom didn't. She can't just be gone like that." His desperate gaze darted around the room, hoping, praying, that she would walk in any second, that his dad would appear and tell him it was all a mistake. But the house remained filled with strangers, suffocating sorrow hanging heavy in the air. Then he saw her, his grandmother, Eleanor, stepping through the door. Her face was marked with grief, her eyes swollen from crying. Without a word, she ran to him and pulled him into a tight embrace. "Oh, my dear, I'm here now," she whispered. "Everything will be okay." But Timmy wasn't sure anything would ever be okay again. As Eleanor tried to comfort him, Timmy's eyes flickered toward two officers speaking in hushed tones. One held a phone, while the other scribbled notes into a small book. Something about their conversation seemed important, too important. But it was happening just out of his reach, just beyond his understanding. Eleanor pulled away gently and stroked his hair. "Sweetheart, you're coming with me tonight. Let's gather some of your things, okay?" Timmy nodded, but as he followed his grandmother upstairs, his heart ached. He wasn't just leaving behind his belongings. He was leaving behind the only life he had ever known. And in the depths of his grief, a silent fire ignited within him. He had to know the truth. At just 13 years old, Timmy spent countless hours pondering how best to use the information he had discovered on his mother's phone. At times, he imagined himself standing in court, boldly proclaiming the truth for all to hear. Other times, the crushing fear of failure extinguished his hopes. That night, as he stared once again at the device in his trembling hands, Elena entered his room and sat beside him. "Timmy, sometimes, even when it feels impossible, we have to take the first step," she said gently. "Your mom believed in truth above all else, and I know you inherited that strength from her. Whatever you decide to do, I'll be by your side." Her words echoed in Timmy's mind as he finally closed his eyes, resolved to take action. He didn't yet know exactly how, but he knew one thing for certain: he had to fight for the truth. The day of the trial dawned beneath a gray sky, as if the world itself shared the weight of the moment. Sitting in the back seat of the car, Timmy clutched his mother's cell phone in his pocket, its presence heavier than ever. Elena sat beside him, holding his hand tightly as they drove toward the courthouse in tense silence. Fear churned inside him. What if he failed? When they arrived, the towering courthouse loomed over them, its imposing facade almost menacing. As he stepped out of the car, he saw a small crowd gathered outside. Reporters, curious onlookers, and murmuring spectators speculating about the case. Elena placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Stay close to me," she whispered. "You're stronger than you think." Timmy nodded, trying to summon courage, and together they stepped inside. The courthouse interior was cold and formal, with wooden benches and an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to steal the air from the room. Timmy spotted his father sitting beside the defense attorney, looking lost and broken. David Miller, accused of a crime he hadn't committed, seemed like a man shattered beyond repair. Seeing his father like that made Timmy's chest tighten with emotion. He knew his father needed him, but the thought of standing up and speaking the truth paralyzed him. Then the trial began. As the judge entered, silence engulfed the room. The prosecution presented their case with devastating efficiency, painting David as a jealous man who had lost control in a fit of rage. Timmy clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He knew his father could never have harmed his mother. The most tense moment of the trial came when Jack, the lead officer on the case, was called to testify. Entering the courtroom with impeccable posture, his uniform crisp and expression unreadable, Jack projected confidence. His presence was intimidating, and he knew it. "Officer Jack, you were the first to arrive at the crime scene, correct?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes, I was," Jack replied firmly. He then described the crime scene in meticulous detail, reinforcing the accusations against David. There were clear signs of a struggle. Everything indicated that he was present at the time of the incident, Jack concluded, casting a cold glance toward David. As Jack spoke, Timmy felt sweat gathering at his temples. Something about the officer's tone unsettled him. He knew, from the messages on his mother's phone, that Jack was more than just the investigator. He was someone with a reason to silence Mary Miller. Timmy's hand instinctively clutched the phone in his pocket. The evidence inside could change everything, yet fear held him frozen. The defense attorney fought to argue against the prosecution's claims, but the battle felt hopeless. The judge, impassive, seemed inclined to believe the prosecution's narrative. Then the moment of decision arrived. The judge straightened his glasses and spoke, his deep voice filling the courtroom. After reviewing the testimonies and the evidence presented, this court is inclined to believe in the defendant's culpability. The word struck Timmy like a hammer. His heart pounded, his breath turned shallow, and every passing second felt like a step closer to an irreversible verdict. David, his head lowered, appeared resigned to his fate. In the back row, Elena clutched her chest, bracing herself for what was about to happen. And then, Timmy stood up. The sudden scrape of his chair against the floor shattered the silence. Every head turned toward him. He took a deep breath, his pulse roaring in his ears. "Wait," he shouted. His voice shook, but his resolve did not. The judge stopped mid-sentence, his gaze sharp with surprise and impatience. "Who are you, young man? This is not the time for interruptions." Timmy stepped forward, gripping the phone tightly in his hand, the object that held all the answers. He met the judge's gaze head-on. "My name is Timmy Miller," he said, his voice trembling yet unwavering. "I'm the son of David and Mary Miller, and I need you to hear what I have to say. The truth is here." He raised his mother's phone high for all to see. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. The prosecutor immediately objected. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The boy is not authorized to speak." "Order," the judge commanded, banging his gavel. He turned to Timmy, his expression a mix of curiosity and gravity. "Very well, young man. If you claim to have something relevant to this case, speak now. But understand, everything will be rigorously examined." Timmy swallowed hard, his pulse racing. He glanced at Elena, who nodded in encouragement. He stepped forward and handed the phone to the court officer, who delivered it to the judge. "My mom was an investigative journalist," Timmy began, his voice growing stronger. "She was working on a case about a corrupt police officer. All the evidence is in that phone, messages, notes, recordings. My mom knew she was in danger. She was threatened, and the person who threatened her wasn't my dad." The courtroom stilled. The judge ordered the phone to be analyzed immediately. As the technicians worked, the tension in the room became unbearable. Jack, the once composed officer, now sat visibly shaken. He adjusted his collar, avoiding eye contact with the judge or Timmy. Minutes passed like hours. Then, the court specialist handed the report to the judge. He read it slowly, his expression darkening. He turned to Jack. "Officer Jack," he began, his voice sharp with authority. "The evidence shows that the threatening messages sent to Mary Miller came from your personal device. Can you explain how that is possible?" Jack stammered. "Those messages could have been faked. Anyone can spoof a phone number." The judge cut him off. "The records also place you near the Miller residence on the night of the crime." He set down the report. "You had a clear motive to silence her." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Jack's face paled. He tried to protest, but two court officers moved in. "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice and suspected involvement in the homicide of Mary Miller." As he was escorted out, The judge turned back to David. His voice softened. "Mr. Miller, the accusations against you were based on insufficient evidence and manipulated testimony. In light of this new evidence, this court declares you innocent of all charges. You are free to go." Tears spilled down Timmy's face as he ran to his father. David embraced him, his body shaking. "You saved me, son," he whispered. "Your mother would be so proud." Timmy held on tight. "I just did what she would have done." As they left the courthouse, the weight on their shoulders felt lighter. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they had the strength to face it together, just as Mary would have wanted. And for the first time in a long time, Timmy felt something he thought he had lost. "Oh,